Welcome to the Evingston Wellness Blueprint, the podcast that takes you on a transformative journey to holistic health and well-being. Join hosts Matthew and Rebecca as they deep dive into the world of wellness, exploring a wide range of holistic modalities, alternative healing practices, and evidence-based approaches to living a vibrant and balanced life.
Sarah Bamford Seidelmann, MD, is a fourth-generation physician, accomplished writer, shamanic healer, artist, and coach. Her 6 books have all been instant Amazon bestsellers. Her What the Walrus Knows app for iOS has users in 65 countries. For 20 years, Sarah was a board-certified pathologist, what she calls a disease hunter. After decades of seeking out illnesses, she grew curious about what creates health. Through her own investigation and with the help of her spiritual ally, Alice the elephant, in Spiritborn, she discovered that creative self-expression is fundamental to our vitality and health. Sarah specializes in helping others foster a connection to spirit by spending time in nature and observing the birds and animals. Sarah has been an instructor and curriculum creator for Martha Beck's Wayfinder Life Coach training and an official contributor for Maria Shriver's Architects of Change. Sarah is currently making art and preparing to publish her 7th book, a richly illustrated and entertaining volume about boundaries for helpers and healers. She co-leads a creative community called Shine for writers and artists who are committed to showing up for their work, no matter what. Sarah, welcome to the Evingston Wellness podcast, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me, Rebecca. I'm so pumped to be here.
Wonderful. Sarah, I am sure there have been many books that have inspired your spiritual growth journey, and I'm curious if you could share one or two that stand out as being particularly meaningful or instrumental to bring support or advancement to your spiritual journey.
Ooh, that is a great question. I love it. Well, one of my favorites is Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. It's probably one of the only books I've read more than 3 times. And every time I read it, I just kind of go, a lot of commonalities in that his pilgrim who was sort of lost on the path, how he found his way back was through signs and symbols, strange things happening, interesting conversations like visions of things, objects. And really, that's kind of how I found my way back through the beasties or the wild animals that I started to encounter on my path. So that's one. And the other I would say would be Martha Beck. She's got so many good ones. But the one that started me off on my Martha Beck love affair was Finding Your North Star. It's hilarious. It's self-help, but it's so entertaining as you're weeping your way through the book. If you're feeling lost at sea, it's a wonderful book with lots of practical exercises and things. So it's fantastic.
So, Sarah, you talked about signs and some symbols. Did it feel in your spiritual journey like it was a series of synchronicities unfolding, or did it more just appear to make sense when you looked at it going backward?
Well, I would say both. I mean, years later, a lot of it makes so much sense. One thing I learned from one of my mentors, Martha Beck, was that life is best understood backwards. It really hardly makes sense when we're going through it. However, when I started to pay attention to, for example, the wild animals that were crossing my path, and to give you a little background, coming from a traditional medicine background, I was a pretty linear logical gal. I wasn't like, whoa, into astrology or anything mystical. I was just like, wait a minute, animals are going to help me on my path. How are they going to help me figure out what to do? I was on my sabbatical from medicine and feeling mighty confused. But as I started to pay attention to the little beasties that I would see during the day, and then going inward, asking myself, what could this animal be trying to tell me? Like if he or she was trying to tell me something, what would they be trying to tell me? I started to have some really neat synchronicities with numbers. And I remember one night, my husband and I saw this family. It was a mother raccoon with 4 babies following her across the road. We have 4 kids. So it was just like, okay. And it was at the time when I was supposed to be going back to work. And I had this message that the raccoon was supposed to help me drop my mask. I looked into their reproductive cycles. I was just looking for timing and when I was going to be going back to work. And that was the exact reproductive cycle. And I was like, and it just felt so supportive. It's time for me to really be me, whether I go back to work or I stay back and say, I'm going to reinvent myself and do a whole new thing. Either way, it's time to be honest and drop that mask.
That is a beautiful reference and looking into nature for all of these different symbols and messages. So, Sarah, for all of the parents out there who are feeling a pull to slow down their own careers and spend time with their children more, what encouragement might you offer?
Well, first, I would offer a lot of compassion because I think we're swimming in this culture that worships at the altar of money and drive and ambition. As parents, deep down, know what is most precious and remember that because the most precious thing is the time that we have to sit and be in a present space with our children and you don't get it back. And so even if maybe it doesn't feel possible to cut back on work, I mean, obviously, if you can cut down and modify your lifestyle, I am a big fan of that. But if that's not feeling realistic right now, doing something so simple as to turn off the TV in your house or remove it altogether, or creating some space where you can be together that doesn't involve everybody on their phones. I think the first thing would be to acknowledge if this is a big shift you want to make, start to talk about it. What life do you want to dream of? What would it take? And what would that look like? And talking with your partner or whoever you're raising your kids with. That's one of the things we did is we just started to talk and it was like, well, the first thing we realized is we needed to get out of the house we were in because the mortgage was requiring us to both keep going full steam and that wasn't working. So we decided to sell our house and downsized into a much less fancy house that had been foreclosed on. That was kind of how it started. And it took a long time, but it's worth it. So just taking some baby steps into exploring what would that look like for you? I see younger parents every day wrestling with this feeling too of I should be out there working. I should be contributing income to the bottom line of our family, even when they don't need to. I think that comes from, again, this whole thing about if we had more money, well, then we can go on a Disney cruise or we could do whatever. But take time to be with yourself and ask yourself what is most precious to you and then move towards it any way you can. You're going to find a way.
Yeah. As I really became more aware, I had this fire or passion inside of me to, even though it felt impossible, to carve out more time and reduce my hours of working to try to prioritize those really special moments with them. And then that entered a new chapter of my life where we began biking together and skiing together and hiking together and adventuring. And I found it was the really weird moments or odd moments that we really remember. I remember one time hiking in Hartley Park and it started raining. And on the way home, we saw a bear and I didn't know what to do. So we all started singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star just to try to let the bear know that we were there. And we still to this day talk about the most random day when it started raining and we called the bear Twinkle. So those really random, unique moments can become beautiful lifelong memories.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to candy coat parenting at all because I talk about in the book Swimming with Elephants how this summer that I did when I went on my sabbatical, I was so excited to be a stay-at-home parent and oh man, it was so challenging for me. So it's not that parenting is like so blissful necessarily, but it's just good to bear witness to your kids and be with them. There's a lot of blessings in that.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's also quite humbling. I remember looking into my son's eyes early one morning. He came into bed and snuggled with me and I was telling him how wonderful it was to be his mom and how happy I am to do adventures with him and all kinds of things. And after a long sort of spiel from me, he looked right into my eyes and he said, "Ma," and I was expecting this sort of statement of love back. And he was like, "You have bad breath." It's a beautiful adventure, but sometimes, again, those really unique scenarios make for the most fantastic memories. I probably wouldn't have remembered if he would have said something like, "Oh, I love you too."
Mhm.
Well, speaking of parenting, one of the women who trained me in my first nursing job, Chris Russo, I asked her for a piece of advice on parenting when I got pregnant. And she said, one of the most beautiful things that you can give to your children is to admit when you've been wrong in a scenario. And that's something that I've carried with me and say, I've just been really grumpy with them. I think of Chris and I'm like, okay, I go to them and say like, hey, I made a mistake here and repair that relationship. But any other overarching words of wisdom to share?
I love that. I love that advice so much because I just think that is going to single-handedly create the opportunity for repair. And also kids can learn it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to apologize. You don't lose face. It's just what we do. And we're human beings. Showing your kids that it's okay to make mistakes. That is a fantastic. And then the other thing I would say would be like, getting time for yourself. It's really easy for moms and dads. I speak mostly with women or people who identify as female, and I would say, yeah, this idea that we sort of get lost in parenting, becoming the uber mother, trying to sacrifice ourselves, and so it's super important to find ways to create time for yourself, getting wonderful babysitters, and letting your kids learn to trust other people. That other people can take care of them, and they're going to be okay.
Yeah. I'm curious, what are some of the holistic or spiritual practices that you love to incorporate to help make you feel complete and to give back to yourself as a parent or even just as a human in general?
Probably the most significant and the thing that I come back to again and again is shamanic journeying, which may sound like some really strange thing to people. So essentially, it's the practice of using a drum, a particular drum beat to alter the consciousness so that you can access spiritual modes of reality. And this all may sound so strange to whoever's listening, but believe me, it sounded strange to me too until I had some experiences. And that's where I can connect with these loving and compassionate spirits, such as Alice, the elephant. And these are ancient technologies. These shamanic technologies have been around forever. And many of us believe it's because they're very effective and they're very useful and they're very low cost. A drum isn't very expensive and you can teach your friend how to journey and access these realities. But whenever I struggle with anything, or even when I'm not struggling, I will journey and just ask Alice, teach me what I most need to learn today. Or, for example, in the book, Swimming with Elephants, I talked about how I would go to her to ask questions about parenting. I mean, there's so many things that as a parent you struggle with, or in your marriage, or in your job. And it's just like, well, I don't know what to do, or can't figure it out. And every time that I go on a journey, I'm just like, what? How am I going to figure this out? And then when I go visit those realms, I always come back relieved. The answers are usually so simple. It's a very experiential, kind of a sensual experience. So if I go on the journey feeling all anxious and stressed about something, by the end, I'm just like either crying or laughing. I know what I need to do or not do by the end. Shamans are sort of like scientists, and I believe we're all a bit shaman and we can all do these practices if we're interested. And over time, I developed this faith because every time I would go and the advice I was given, I would apply it to my life. And I was like, wow, things were better and things got easier. It's a place many people have gone throughout time to create art, to find formulas for amazing things. It is quite esoteric, but at the same time, regular people do it all over the world.
Yes. And even if you want to look at it from a scientific perspective, I would imagine that when you're in a shamanic ceremony or a drumming, that your brain would go into a different brainwave state where it's able to process information better.
Yes, they've done studies, and people who are doing shamanic drum meditation go into theta brainwave state, which is this kind of the same as REM, dream sleep, that phase where you're not fully awake. So you're fully aware of what's going on in the room, but you're able to access this place that's the same place that Tibetan monks who've been meditating up in caves for 20 years are going into that place.
And you have available as a free resource, correct, on your website, a recording that you created of shamanic drumming, right?
Yes. So for anybody who's listening and who's like, I wonder who my spirit animal might be. And if you have younger kids, it's really fabulous. If you ask a kid who's under the age of, I'd say 8, Who's your favorite wild animal? Whatever they tell you, I might take that as a very sacred piece of information and maybe try to learn a little bit about that wild creature. Literally try to learn something about them because metaphorically they may be telling you a lot about themselves. It's a really neat way to understand people and also to respect other people. It's like, well, if you're an eagle and I'm a muskrat, well, we're not the same. We have different objectives in life and different ways of getting things done. And so, but when we begin to come together and understand, oh yeah, they're an eagle. They need to sort of, this is how they deal with this situation as they fly high for a while and maybe then they come down and can talk to me again about it. It's a really beautiful tool for that.
Yeah, I loved in your book, Swimming with Elephants, when you were about to go on a journey, your son, Charlie, actually asked if Alice is going to be joining you, and you explained that Alice would be joining you. And then you also related to, did Charlie have a puppy pillow pet? Yeah.
India for a long ways away. And for, I think because Charlie at the time was 6 or maybe younger than that, maybe they were 4. And they totally understood Alice and the whole how mom could have a special friend who was an elephant because they had pillow pet.
Yes.
Children understand these things. And I've heard one teacher say that the reason children have so many stuffed animals and many kids collect hundreds is directly correlated with the spirit animals or the beings that they can still see, that they can still be connected with. And I love that idea. Then over time, we're taught whatever you can't see with your naked eye doesn't exist. And I think then we spend the rest of our lives trying to get back to that. And when we hit our 40s and stuff doesn't make sense anymore, we can't dig our way out by doing things that are logical. Many of us, anyway, need to connect with spirit again to try to find our way because we get so lost.
As I was approaching my 40s, I became very interested in meditation. I was always drawn to different types of drumming, and I found that the more I explored meditation and different spiritual practices, I felt whole and complete. And I would find myself doing the most unconventional things. I'd be laying out in the backyard under some trees in the grass, meditating and just feeling so wonderful. I remember one day walking out there and finding feathers in my meditation spot, different days, completely different feathers, but right where I would always meditate. And it was so beautiful and meaningful. My journey was tied to wanting to spend more time with my children. When my schedule changed for work and I started being able to walk with the kids to the bus stop, I remember finding, I think it was a grouse feather, and it meant something so significant to me. And the kids looked at me and they're like, "Don't touch it, you're gonna get rabies." So that was always their joke. To this day, I have this huge, beautiful collection of feathers, taking them to Madeline Island, and I found woodpecker feathers. Spending time with my brother, I remember hiking at Ely's Peak, and I found this gorgeous feather. It was so beautiful. I shared with my brother. I find feathers at really special moments, and it was a great conversation. And then we were hiking a few minutes later, and my brother was in front. He was like, Bex, I don't know what to tell you about this one. And a bird had been killed.
Oh, yeah.
There's feathers everywhere. And we just erupted in laughter because I just got done telling him this beautiful thing about feathers.
Well, and that vision of the bird that's been probably eaten by something like I'm picturing a songbird or something that's been eaten. Symbolically, we sometimes have to go through this process of disappearance or death of ourselves. And it can be a reminder that we have these identities that sometimes need to die. My identity as a pathologist or as a physician had to die. And that wasn't a fun or pretty process. And believe me, I clung to it as long as I could. But then finally it was like, nope, you're done with that. And that's even when we want something different, it can be really hard and painful. But that's something in shamanism. A lot of times people will dream of being attacked or dismembered, like torn apart literally by an animal in their dreams. And you and I would think, well, that sounds terrible and ominous. But in shamanic cultures, people are like, yeah, man, that means you have these friends that are helping you to kind of dismember yourself so that you can be put back together, go forward in a good way in your life, in a way that's more in integrity with who you really are.
Interestingly enough, this has been an incredible transformation over the past decade of my life, I went through a divorce with the man who was my high school sweetheart and college sweetheart. And then we had our two children together. And that was a very humbling experience. It gave me the opportunity to really look at and change parts of myself. I didn't understand that happiness comes from me on my own, and that's my responsibility. There's so many lessons that I learned, and although it was a very difficult journey, it was one that I really needed to go through to become the best version of myself. Transformation, although it can be painful, it oftentimes is so incredibly rewarding to get through on the other side and look at that new version of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. The worst thing often becomes the seed for the best thing.
So, Sarah, while you've had many beautiful experiences on your spiritual journey, would you tell us about one that you feel was particularly pivotal and describe it for our listeners?
One of the things that I'd always felt drawn to is going to India. And I didn't know how I was going to go there. And when I first got married, I remember telling my husband my dream, like, one day we're going to go to India. And it was so funny. He's like 24 years old. And he just looked at me and he goes, I'm never going there. And I go, what? Who doesn't want to go to India? And that's when I realized that it was only apparently me who had the dream. Well, anyway, a long time goes by and I think I'm like 42. And this email comes from a yoga studio and it says, there's going to be this trip going to India. And if you're interested, come Saturday because we're going to have a little talk about what it's going to be like. Meanwhile, I had just started on this spiritual journey and I had been visiting Alice, my elephant, in these spiritual realms. And she kept taking me to this place where there were these two rivers in the spiritual world and they merged together and became one river. And we would just sit there really quietly. And she was explaining to me that one of the rivers was made out of material things and the other one was spiritual. But when they came together through your mind, that's where things became manifest. It was a little over my head, but I was like, okay. And we would just sit there very calmly. Well, anyway, so I came to this yoga studio. It's like pouring rain. We all get in there. We're just drenched. And the lady says rain is very auspicious in India. And we're like, okay. And then she goes, let me tell you where we're planning to go. And it's the largest gathering of humanity on earth. There will be 60 million people going through this area. And we're going to be there to pray for peace. And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. Peace in the world and blessing everybody in the planet. And then she said, and where we're going to be is this confluence between these two rivers. There's spiritual rivers that come together and then they become the Ganges River, which is the largest, one of the largest rivers in the world. And then everybody will be bathing in this Ganges River. And it was so strange. This is all I've been doing is spending time at this confluence. And now here I am at this place. I mean, I knew I had to go. I just knew it. So I immediately signed up. And then it was very scary because as I started to realize 60 million people going to this tiny little place, I mean, it really started to bring up a lot of fear. And I remember calling the lady at the place and I was like, I know you said there was like a special mantra we're supposed to be doing, but I like might need a special mantra. And then she's like, and then she put down the phone for a long time. She goes, here's a mantra for fear. And then she sent me this mantra that was like 10 pages long and I couldn't do it. But anyway, I just knew I have to keep going and this I have to say yes to. I remember being really terrified in India too. Like we got to the Ganges River after like a 17-hour bus ride. It was just like, oh my gosh, I'm in the wrong. This is a big mistake. I shouldn't be here. I was just freaking out. And the guy led me in the dark with a flashlight to my little grass hut on the Ganges River. When we got there, on the door was the number 3 of this grass hut. And that's another thing I knew. I had been told in many dreams I would wake up and the clock would say 3:33. And I would just hear this voice in my head say, this is your number. And whenever you see this number, it's a good thing. And then I just felt relieved, like, okay, this is terrifying, but it's going to be okay. Spell.
Wow. And it was a roller coaster for you, it sounds like there, because you had wanted to swim, correct? And then it sounded like you weren't going to be able to swim.
Of course, the one thing you're supposed to do in this pilgrimage, this pilgrimage that I undertook was like the Super Bowl of all Hindu pilgrimage. It's like worth 100 other pilgrimages. So it's really hard. And when we get there and they're like, yeah, you can't go in the water and you can't bathe in the Ganges River because there's so much E. coli bacteria in it. It's dangerous levels. So the government forbids it. But yeah, when we would go to the place, I would see lots of people getting in the river. So I knew people were getting in. And then I just thought, I'm a scientist too. I knew like I didn't have any broken skin. I'm not immunocompromised. Like for me to get in, I could probably roll any coal, I'd probably be okay. I found an older woman that was in our group that was secretly going to the river every day and bathing, and she took me, and it was profoundly beautiful. Yeah, it's absolutely life altering. And if you want to read the stories, check out the book. There's so many good stories in there about things that happened.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. In your book, Swimming with Elephants, you've described several scenarios in which you placed yourself in situations that had high potential to foster your personal and spiritual growth, including the wild Mustang encounter, traveling to India, Africa, and joining your husband Mark at the event near Joshua Tree. So, with each of these experiences, trust and surrender were required on your part, and there was no guarantee of an aha moment or transformational experience. So did you just know that maybe moments of clarity or understanding might come in the days, weeks, or months after your journey?
Yeah, I kind of just followed my nose, like whatever, like the wild Mustangs. It was like, wow, I'm really curious to do that work. I had done some work with horses before, and so that's how I ended up there. I think what really helped me when I was just like, WTF is going on? Having expectations is a problem. That's one thing I've learned. One of the shamans from Colombia that I've gotten to know and love, he always says, yeah, like, don't have any expectations is a very bad idea because we may have some idea of what it's going to be like to work with wild mustangs and then miss the message, which can be so profound and so funny. Being curious would be one tip. Like once you know, okay, I'm going to do this thing, let go of your expectations. And if there's anything that's going to hold you back, that's one thing I routinely do now. If I'm walking into a transformational experience, weekend, retreat, whatever, I'll sit with myself before I go and be like, okay, what do you need to let go of so you can actually get something out of this? Because, the ego doesn't want to learn. The ego doesn't like to be humbled and it doesn't want to be vulnerable. And so a lot of times I have to let go of my wanting to be in charge or know everything. Like that's a classic ego thing for me. And just being curious, like what is going on here? Why might I be having been put in this situation just like this? Now I just laugh all the time because I just feel like God or the universe is just up there chuckling, going, "Whoa, how's she going to get out of this one now?" I get tricked into these relationships, experiences, adventures where it's just like, whoa, like we're learning a lot. And if I can just stay in that open, teachable, curious mode, that's ideal.
Yeah.
Or get mad and run away. Sometimes I've done that too. Sometimes I'm like, just this isn't for me.
I love the part with the brass knuckles coaching because I don't do well with brass knuckles coaching, and I probably would have.
No, that taught me so much about my husband. I mean, I was blown away. I was like, this is what you've been doing. Wow.
Yeah.
We still kind of laugh about that too, but it was also really powerful. I love having those experiences where everybody who walks in the door to an event or be it a healing ceremony, be it a retreat, but everybody comes in and kind of drops their armor at the door and is just like, yeah, I could use some help, or I don't know what's going on, or I'm looking for some inspiration, or whatever it is. That is just so fun and just a recipe for good soul times.
Definitely a recipe for transformation if you can leave it all at the door and just go it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Sarah, if you could go back and give a message to your younger self with respect to your spiritual journey, what would that be?
I would say it's okay to take time for yourself. It's okay to spend money to learn about shamanic healing or coaching or whatever you want. It's okay to leave this job. You're okay. Following your heart is not going to steer you wrong. I think that was my big fear. Like, maybe I'm crazy. Why everybody else is staying in their job in medicine? What's wrong with me that I feel like I can't do this one more day? It's killing me. That's a little dramatic, but literally, some days I think I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't think I could have identified that it was that I wanted to be with my kids. And even that would have been hard for me to admit because I'd built up such a wall of the patriarchy and just being really tough. Like, yep, I've got kids. Yep, they're the babysitter. Yep, it's fine. Everything's great.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get down on my knees and weep because I was just like, I want to go work at the daycare. I was like, I wish I could get a part-time job here so I could spend time with my kids.
Yeah, absolutely. What you just described is exactly what I felt when I read the book. It made me feel normal It made me feel understood in so many ways. So I'm so grateful that you were willing to share your story with the world.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. That's what I hope that somebody else would feel.
So, would you mind telling us about how people could work with you and your social media handles, etc.?
Sure. You can find my websites, followyourfeelgood.com. And yes, you can get a find your spirit animal, spirit core beastie meditation there. I'm on Instagram, just at Sarah Seidelman. I'm on Facebook also, YouTube. I've got lots of stuff there too. And that's the same thing, Sarah Seidelman. I work with people doing sessions of shamanic healing, which involves soul retrieval and all kinds of things. You can find out more about that at the site. Then I have this wonderful creative community called Shine, where people who are really committed to writing books or doing their art or writing music, we are all supporting each other. And my partner, Inger, and I teach creativity, things to keep us afloat, self care for artists, all these things. And we work together. We all get our work done.
Wonderful. So it's part accountability, part support and encouragement.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, you can find all my books and there's an app and you can find all that at my website too.
Yeah, I'll link all of that in the description as well with this podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I would just say that I heard recently that 2024 would be an excellent time to plant seeds for the things that you want to grow in your life for the rest of your life. And I think that's so beautiful. Like, what seed could you plant in 2024 that down the road you may be able to enjoy the shade of that mango tree or that white pine or whatever it is? I really like that idea because seeds are small. They're not so overwhelming.
Absolutely. And I look forward to reading your new book that's coming out on boundaries. What is it called?
It's called Boundaries Make Love Possible.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. Sarah, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. It was awesome.
Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope today's episode inspired you on your journey of wellness. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review, subscribing, and sharing it with a friend. Also, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a message at www.healingsandwellness.com.